Hello students, welcome to the channel. Today we'll discuss a history passage. This is from the reading section of the October 2020 PSAT. This is a history paired passage, passage 4 of the test. So let's begin. Questions 29 to 38 are based on the following passages. Passage 1 is adapted from Dwight D. Eisenhower's 1955 remarks to the National Association of Radio and Television Broadcasters. Passage 2 is adapted from a 1958 speech by Edward Murrow. Passage 1. One of the things that has made us an informed public is the fact that we have had a free press, and now these great institutions, the radio and the television, have moved in to take their place alongside the older media of mass communication. There is a tremendous responsibility here, in some ways I think transcending that is placed before the publisher. The publisher puts in your home a piece of print. It is essentially cold, although of course we admit that some writers have an ability to dress it up and make even disagreeable facts at times look fairly pleasant. But with the television or with the radio, you put an appealing voice or an engaging personality in the living room of the home, where there are impressionable people from the ages of understanding on up. Okay, so the first passage, in fact, the context tells us that both writers will probably talk about the effect of mass media, and Eisenhower, who is the writer of the first passage, begins by describing the new kinds of mass media technologies. This is 1955, so new is television and radio, and how they are different from the press, which is an older media technology. The press is essentially cold in that you get a piece of paper and it's something that you read. Some writers can write beautifully, they can write in a way that challenges you, that excites you, but essentially it's you and the paper, right? But with radio and television, there is a third person. There's a person who is taking on the persona of the newscaster. There's a person who is giving you the news and who is bringing his own personality to the news. In the radio, it's his voice, and on the television, it's his voice as well as the visual appeal, right? So those are differences between the old and the new technologies. In many ways, therefore, the effect of your industry in swaying public opinion, and I think particularly about burning questions of the moment, may be even greater than the press. Because he's addressing the radio and television broadcasters. It is something different, and you do introduce personality as well as cold fact. I think again that places added responsibility to see that the news in those areas of the radio and television field that have to do with the dissemination of facts is truthfully told with the integrity of the entire industry behind it. So here he kind of focuses on the need for integrity because, as he describes in the previous paragraph, news delivered through radio and television is more impactful. It leaves an impression, and so it has a higher responsibility of being truthful. I once heard an expression with respect to newspaper standards. The newspaper columns belong to the public and the editorial page belongs to the paper. And for myself, I find that an easy standard to follow and to apply as I examine a newspaper. I should think that some such standard could be developed among you. Of course, you want to entertain. Of course, you want people to look at it, and I'm all for it. And I think everybody else is. But when we come to something that we call news, and I'm certain that I'm not speaking of anything you haven't discussed earnestly among yourselves, let us simply be sure it is news. Let all of the rest of the time be given to entertainment or the telling of stories or the fanciful fairy tales that we sometimes find in other portions of publications. So in this particular paragraph, he moves to describing the very important distinction between news and entertainment. So he says that when it comes to papers, we know that the editorial line is the newspapers. That is what the newspaper believes. And we should have some such distinction between the editorial line and the news pages for television and radio broadcast as well. We need to know what is news, and what is news must be truthfully told. Okay, so that was the first passage. So let's try and attempt the first few questions. Based on passage 1, Eisenhower would most likely agree that typical viewers of broadcast news are strongly opposed to efforts to turn facts into entertainment, might be too easily influenced by a likable and persuasive newscaster, would rather get news from print sources than from television or radio, are indifferent as to whether most newscasters are well trained as journalists. So I think it should be B, because I don't think he brings up any of the others. He doesn't talk about strong opposition to turning facts into entertainment. That is not something that typical viewers of broadcast news worry about, or something that Eisenhower brings up. There is no mention of getting news from print rather than from television or radio. And there is no mention of newscasters training. So I think it's B. But before I choose B, I'd like to look at the evidence. So 12 to 16, 20 to 21, 22 to 26, and 33 to 34. Okay, so 12 to 16 says, but with the television or with the radio, you put an appealing voice or an engaging personality in the living room where there are impressionable people from the ages of understanding on. So that seems like a good evidence for the fact that, you know, there might, the viewers might be influenced by likable and persuasive newscasters. So I'm liking A as evidence for option B for 29. Okay, 20 to 21, it is something different, and you do introduce personality as well as cold fact. So that's just a distinction between television and print. 22 to 26, I think again that places added responsibility to see that the news in those areas of the radio and television field that have to do with dissemination of facts is truthfully told. So that's a prescription that he is making, while the question pertains to what the viewers of broadcast like or want. So that, again, 22 to 26 is not relevant. 33 to 34, of course, you want to entertain. That's it. Of course, you want people to look at it. So again, this is not something which is relevant. So I'm going with B for 29. And I'm going with A for 30. Okay, 30 is A. Okay. Which claim about editorial standards in print journalism and in broadcast journalism is implied by Eisenhower in passage 1? Neither print nor broadcast journalism has been able to adapt editorial standards to a changing news environment. The editorial standards for print journalism are somewhat outmoded compared with the standards that prevail in radio and television. Rigorous editorial standards are enthusiastically endorsed by executives in both print and broadcast journalism. Broadcast journalism has not yet established adequate editorial standards for presenting the news in the way that print journalism has. Right, so this is very clearly D, because in the last paragraph, he says very categorically that print has a standard for journalistic integrity, and that comes from the fact that the newspaper columns belong to the public and the editorial page belongs to the paper, right? So there's a very clear distinction between the editorial and the newspaper line, right? But that kind of distinction is something that has not yet emerged for broadcast. So I'm liking D here. And if this is evidence, then I would definitely look for evidence in here, somewhere here, between 30 to 35, right? So, okay, so all of them are there. So I'll just go with D for 31. That's pretty solid. And for this 27 to 30, 30 to 31, 31 to 33, and 34 to 35. Okay, so let's look at that. 27, I once heard an expression with respect to newspaper standards, the newspaper columns. Right, okay, so that's just describing that the newspapers have this standard. 30 to 31 for myself, I find that an easy standard to follow and apply as I examine a newspaper. 31 to 33, I should think that some such standard could be developed among you. Of course, you want to entertain. Okay. Of course, you want people to look at it, and I'm all for it. All right. So the fact that broadcasters don't have a standard as yet would come from option C, 31 to 33. I should think that some such standard could be developed among you. So there is a standard for print, and there is the lack of a standard for broadcast, which is what the right answer for 31 had said, option D. So that is being said by Eisenhower in option C. So 32 is C. Okay, as used in line 67, charged with 67 is the second passage. So let's read that. Passage 2. Let's look at the name of the author again. This is Murrow. Okay. One of the basic troubles with radio and television news is that both instruments have grown up as an incompatible combination of show business, advertising, and news. Each of the three is a rather bizarre and demanding profession, and when you get all three under one roof, the dust never settles. The top management of the networks, with a few notable exceptions, has been trained in advertising, research, sales, or show business. But by the nature of the corporate structure, they also make the final and crucial decisions having to do with news and public affairs. Frequently, they have neither the time nor the competence to do this. It is not easy for the same small group of men to decide whether to buy a new station for millions of dollars, build a new building, alter the rate card, buy a new Western, sell a soap opera, decide what defensive line to take in connection with the latest congressional inquiry, how much money to spend on promoting a new program, what additions or deletions should be made in the existing covey or clutch of vice presidents, and at the same time, frequently on the same long day, to give mature, thoughtful consideration to the manifold problems that confront those who are charged with the responsibility of news and public affairs. Right, so right from the word go, we see Murrow, the author of the second passage, take a more determined stand than Eisenhower had done in his passage, right? And he presents the structure of the radio and broadcast business as something that is ill-suited to proper oversight of news affairs, right? He says that the same people, the same corporate overlords look at show business, they look at advertising, and they look at news oversight. And then he gives these list of decisions that a manager, a corporate manager in a company, in a television company might have to take on a daily basis. And they're so varied and they are so different from one another that he would not have the time or the competence to give a proper judgment on news and editorial policy, right? So something which was broached by Eisenhower towards the end is kind of tackled head on by Murrow in the second passage. Sometimes there's a clash between the public interest and the corporate interest. A telephone call or a letter from the proper quarter in Washington is treated rather more seriously than a communication from an irate but not politically potent viewer. It is tempting enough to give away a little airtime for frequently irresponsible and unwarranted utterances in an effort to temper the wind of criticism. Upon occasion, economics and editorial judgment are in conflict, and there is no law which says that dollars will be defeated by duty. Not so long ago, the President of the US delivered a television address to the nation. He was discoursing on the possibility or probability of war between this nation and the Soviet Union and Communist China, a reasonably compelling subject. Two networks, CBS and NBC, delayed the broadcast for an hour and 15 minutes. If this decision was dictated by anything other than financial reasons, the networks didn't deign to explain those reasons. It is difficult to believe that this decision was made by men who love, respect, and understand news. Right, so right off the bat, we can say that the second passage is more opinionated, it is more argumentative than the first passage was. The first passage was given to a group of radio and television broadcasters, so it was somewhat conversational, while this passage is more of an attack, right? In the second and third paragraphs, Murrow talks about the possibilities of clashes between public and corporate interest. For example, the idea that something from Washington, the seat of political power, or someone from Washington might be given a hearing compared to an ordinary viewer. And then the idea that he was discussing in the first paragraph of these men making news judgments not on newsworthiness but on other interests, as reflected by the delay in the broadcast of the president discussing the possibility of a war. Two networks, CBS and NBC, delayed it by an hour and 15 minutes. And Murrow says that nobody who has any sense of newsworthiness would delay such an important address, such an important debate. And the only reason they did that was financial. They might have been running something which earns money, and so they do not want to lose out. And so he kind of repeats what he has said earlier, that newsworthiness is something which may not always bring in the dollars. And so it has to be dealt with, it has to be looked into by people who have a specific skill set, and that skill set may not be available with the corporate lot who run these corporations. Okay, so let's look at this question. As used in line 67, charged with most nearly means. So it says, so all of these things happening to give mature, thoughtful consideration to the manifold problems that confront those who are charged with the responsibility. Those who are charged with, as in those who are professionally bound to do something, right? Who have been given that responsibility. It's a professional responsibility. So those who are entrusted with, right? To be entrusted with the responsibility is to believe or to trust that they take care of that responsibility. So option A is the right answer. Assault, assessed, and accused, they do not fit this context. Okay, in passage 2, lines 70 to 73 have served primarily to suggest. So those lines say, a telephone call or a letter from the proper quarter in Washington is treated rather more seriously than a communication from an irate but not politically potent viewer. They suggest that pressuring a news organization into pursuing a particular course of action can be difficult. Broadcast networks do not give equal attention to all concerns voiced. The volume of complaints made about broadcasters has increased sharply. Viewers can become angry in response to perceived flaws, right? So obviously the answer here is B, right? There is discrimination. There is a preference for the kind of voices that get a hearing. A political voice from Washington is considered more important than of a non-political common man. So they do not give equal attention to all concerns. That's B. As used in line 87, dictated most nearly means. Let's look at dictated. If this decision was dictated by anything other than financial reasons, the networks didn't deign to answer those reasons. If this reason was taken with anything in mind apart from financial, so to take a decision with only those considerations, if this decision was taken, was transcribed, no, was spoken, no, was confirmed, no, was determined. It was determined by anything other than financial reasons. If this decision was determined, right, that fits the context that the determining factor was financial reasons. So C is the good answer for this. An important difference between the two. Okay, so now we have the passage relationship questions. We already know that the style and tone of the two passages are different. The second passage is more critical. The first passage is more conversational. So let's look at it. An important difference between the two passages' respective discussions of broadcast news is that, unlike Eisenhower in passage 1, Murrow in passage 2 identifies key differences between print and broadcast, assumes financial considerations play only a minor role, sees a conflict between news values and entertainment values, explains how the development of the broadcast news business has shaped that industry, right? I think it would be C, right? Because Eisenhower did not see a conflict. He says that you want to entertain, you want people to look at it, and I'm all for it. So he understands that there is an entertainment value even to the news presentation on broadcast, right? So he doesn't see it as a necessary conflict, but Murrow sees it as a deep conflict that goes against the very notion of news judgment. right? He actually he inveighs against having the same corporate bosses look at news, the ones who look at showbiz and television and entertainment. So C is a very potential and a very important difference between the two. Okay. 37, based on passage 2, Murrow would most likely view Eisenhower's appeal to broadcast network executives in 35 to 52 as. So what did Eisenhower say in 35 to 52? But when we come to something that we call news, and I'm certain that I'm not speaking of anything you haven't discussed honestly among yourselves, let us simply be sure it is news. Let all of the rest of time be given to entertainment or the telling of stories. Right? So this is what he said. And how would Murray respond to it? Murray would likely view his appeal as convincing, since network executives would likely improve the quality of news broadcasts. Nuanced, since Eisenhower acknowledges that properly defining what counts as news is difficult. Unrealistic, since separating broadcast from entertainment is a more complex task than Eisenhower recognizes. And vague, since Eisenhower does not specify the amount of time that broadcast networks should devote to news. So I think I'll go with C, because while Eisenhower presents that idea, Eisenhower requests his audience, the broadcast news guys, to look at a very clear demarcation between entertainment and news. I think his appeal is unrealistic because the kind of detailing that Murrow brings to his passage, where he talks about how a corporate executive works and how it is impossible for one person to look at both news oversight and entertainment, that appeal to separate the two would be unrealistic. It's unrealistic because the idea of separating broadcast from entertainment is more complex, right? So I'll go with C here. And 38, based on the passages, Murrow would likely disagree more strongly with Eisenhower's assumption in passage 1 that radio and television are media that can be used to educate the public. Audiences tend to prefer fictional stories to factual accounts. Publishers of print journalism are mostly capable of upholding certain editorial standards for content included in newspapers. Decision makers in the broadcast industry share a common concern for the integrity of how news is presented. Right. So I think it's D, right? Because Eisenhower does come to his audience with good faith, right? He says, in fact, there is a line where he says that I'm sure that you have honestly and earnestly discussed this among yourselves about what is news and how it is different from entertainment. So he comes to it in good faith, right? But Murrow doesn't. Murrow is quite critical of these overlords, these corporate overlords. He says that they would give preference to one voice over another. They would give preference to financial returns over newsworthiness, as the CBS and NBC examples show. So he doesn't share Eisenhower's optimism regarding the people who run the broadcast networks. So right, so he would disagree with option D. He disagrees with that assumption. Okay, so this was the history passage. We started from 29, so let's grade it. 29, so I'm just going to mark this 29 to 38. Okay, 1 second, so it starts from here. Yeah, so it is BADCA, BADCA, BCDCD, BCDCD. So 36 is D. Oh, okay, so we didn't get 36 right. Let's see what 36 is. 36 is D, right? Okay, let's go back and check. 36, right? Okay. So what was happening in 36? 1 second. Yeah. We chose C, right? Okay. An important difference between the two passages respective discussion of broadcast news is that unlike Eisenhower, Murray explains how the development of the broadcast news business has shaped that industry. Right. Does he do that? He does say that, they all come under the same roof. The fact that right. Okay. So he says that all of them come under the same roof: show business, advertisement, and news. And that's part of how this business has developed, right? One of the basic troubles is that all of them have grown up as an incompatible, radio and television have grown up as an incompatible combination of show business. So this is something he does bring up. I think I think C is not correct because, I mean, when we say that Eisenhower does not see a conflict between news values and entertainment values, the fact that he brings them up as separate would indicate that there is a conflict, right? So I think, yeah, C would not be the best answer because the way he brings it up may not be as strong as how Murrow brings it up, but he does talk about the importance of demarcating news from entertainment, right? So he does see that conflict, but he does not see the growth of broadcast industry as an essential part of its problems currently. So D definitely is the better answer. Okay, so right, so we got 9 correct out of 10. If you found this exercise useful, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comment section what other videos, what other topics you'd like me to discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys soon in a new video. Take care. Goodbye.